welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Lydia and I make fitness content here on YouTube. This channel is all about building our lives to last, and everything we do is based on a biblical foundation for everything so that our lives can be impactful and fulfilling. If this is something that you're interested in, I definitely encourage you to continue with us and possibly join the family and subscribe if you haven't already, and invite others in your world. And if you're coming back, welcome back. Hope you had an amazing week and that you're applying these principles and actually studying further. As I always say, my job is simply to entice you. My job is simply to give you a hunger for things for you to study for yourself personally, because there is no possible way in 10 to 15 minutes I can give you an in-depth study on some of these subjects that we are learning together. Get this. We humans are the only species that God created that can be miserable. I know. You know why? Because we are the only species that God created that has a free will. And that free will also enables us to choose to violate the purpose for which we were created or assigned. We are in the middle of speaking about the principles that govern the unseen world. And that principle that I want to touch on today and next week is the principle of authority. We only have legitimate authority and power in the areas or the domain for which we were purposed and are signed. And why it's important for us to understand the principle of authority is because it is the very first thing that our ears heard. Let's read in Genesis where God said, "Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. Let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over the cattle, over the earth, over everything creeping thing that creeps on earth." So God created man in his own image. In the image, God created him male and female. He created them. Then God blessed them. And God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it." Other says, "Have dominion." Other says, "Govern over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, over everything that moves on earth." The first thing that our ears heard was God's blessing over us and God instilling authority for us to have dominion. So today we're going to look at what is dominion and why it is so important for us to understand it and how to operate in it. Because we only have legitimate dominion. We only have legitimate authority. Everything is God's protection, God's provision, God's joy is only found in the areas for which we were authorized to operate in. There are two key principles of authority that I want to touch on. And today I'm going to touch on personal authority. We need to understand our personal authority and we need to understand our spiritual authority. Our spiritual authority is basically for what we were created for. It is for what God assigned us for. So it's important for us to know what has God created us for and how to use that to bring forth his agenda, because that is the two main purposes that God gave us: authority and dominion, for us to fulfill what he has assigned us to, and for us to outwork his agenda through that assignment. There are three biblical characters I'd like us to look at that actually show us how to actually operate and why it's important for us to understand this principle. And the first one is Moses. Moses was authorized by God to liberate the children of Israel from Egyptian captivity. And we see his story from Exodus to the end of Deuteronomy. And then we see that even though years earlier he failed miserably trying to fulfill his assignment in his own strength. So we learn the principle that it's important. Yes, you may know what you're called in, but God's timing and God's way is important. When it was God's timing, God calls him to go back to the very nation where he's facing murder charges and treason, which are death penalties. He goes back with nothing but his brother and a stick. Challenges the highest authority in the land to liberate their slaves for free, for nothing, with only a stick. And yet he was never touched. We don't know, he was never attacked. Even if he was attacked, there's no record of that. There was no logical reason why they never challenged or arrested him, except because he was walking in his divine personal authorization. He was untouchable. Until only when the whole army decided to come after him, even then with only a stick. A stick. He parted the Red Sea, walked on dry land, and they all drowned. When you are in your personal authority, you are untouchable. But it's also important to not only try to do it your way and out of God's timing, because you will get hurt or cause damage. And the next character is Elijah, who's probably one of my favorite prophets, because he just has like this spunky personality, which just makes me think like, oh Lord, we're all, he had bad days, good days, but he was still effective. And we see his story. I encourage you to read it from First Kings 18 to 2 Kings 2. That's where we see a lot of the bulk of what he did. And we see there, as a prophet, he was authorized to challenge false doctrine and evil authority. And I specify prophet. In Corinthians, Paul says we should desire to prophesy. We all can prophesy, but we're not all called prophets. And I encourage you to check out a video that I did where I made the difference and understanding what's the difference between being called into the office of a prophet and just prophesying, because we are all called to prophesy. Because what Elijah did, because he was called in the office of a prophet, he had authorization from heaven and protection to challenge authority. So you and I cannot just go around challenging authority without the authorization of the highest authority to challenge authority that he's instilled. And because he did that, he was able to face and challenge over 200 prophets. He was able to challenge an evil queen who wanted his head, and he escaped. He was able to challenge the kings of the nation, which basically in our day would be presidents. So you and I cannot go around challenging presidents of foreign nations and our own nations and think the angels will just come and protect us. He did that because it was in his domain of authority and authorization. So when you know and you operate under that, you are under God's protection. He was untouchable. Even when only him and his servant came under attack, the angels came, confused the whole armies, and they escaped without even lifting a hand or a finger, until God called him home on a chariot of fire. Just like Moses, who didn't die, who was never killed, but God called him up to die. The third person is Paul. Paul was authorized to reach the Gentiles. And I love Paul so much because he's just the perfect example of God's redeeming power. You and I can get it wrong. It doesn't matter how far we've set off what we are called to, or how we've tried to do like Moses and messed up trying to do God's thing our way and out of timing. But we also learn from Paul. He was called to the Gentiles. He was called to serve God. But because he was submitted under wrong authority, or authority that had steered away from God's agenda. Remember how I said our personal authority and assignment is there to push God's agenda. If you and I are not submitted under legitimate authority, and when I speak of legitimate authorities, don't just go to a church because it is a church. Check, who is your leader submitted under? Is your leader submitted to legitimate authority that keep him and her accountable? Because if Jesus himself was submitted to John and got baptized and released legally, how is a servant of God greater than the master? You cannot serve someone who was not legally released or who's not legally under submission, because you, like Paul, run the risk of going around thinking you're serving God but actually hurting his agenda. But what I love about Paul as well is that regardless of that, God redirected him in his mercy and steered him back on the right course. And when he was in his right assignment, doing God's assignment for his life the right way, he was untouchable. He went through so many shipwrecks. He went through so many beatings and attacks, murder attempts. He was bitten by a poisonous snake, but he was untouchable until he, at the right time, said one of my favorite scriptures in the whole Bible. It's my life goal. And this is what he said. For I am now ready to be offered, and the time of my departure is at hand. I have fought a good fight. I have finished my course. I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, shall give me at that day. and not to me only, but unto all them also that love his appearing. Paul, though many challenges, you and I will face challenges. It doesn't mean just because we're in our domain of authorization, we won't face challenges. But what these three men, like Paul teaches, is that we will be untouchable. We will have God ordained protection, regardless of who comes up against us. You know what I also love about authority? Authority is not the same as power. You can have power and enforce things, but when you have authority, you have power to change situations. You have power to make decisions, and it is not based on majority. You don't have to be popular. It doesn't matter who likes you or doesn't like you. When God has ordained you and authorized you for a specific assignment, you're authorized. You have God ordained authority. No one can block you, and you're in your element of provision. There is provision in the lane for which God has purposed you. There is strength in the lane for which God has assigned you. There is protection in the lane for which God has called you. Elijah was provided for. Moses was provided for leading, I forgot how many millions of people for 40 years and they never starved. Try that. Paul, for over how many years, was being attacked, living in prison, and he was being taken care of because there was provision in the lane of the authorization. When you have authority and you're living in your assignment, you're submitted under legitimate authority. You and I are untouchable until, like these three men, we are ready to offer up our lives and finish our course. Moses was not killed until he finished his course. Yes, there's a lot we can talk about him, but Elijah as well. God called him up. Paul as well. So many times people try to kill him, but he said, I am offering up my life because now I know I have finished my course. When you and I are in an element, we don't have to fear premature death. Until we are ready and we have finished our course, no one can touch us. No one. You don't have to live in fear until you can say like Paul, I have finished my course, because you know your course. You are submitted to God. You are submitted to his will. You are untouchable. So I encourage you to study this, and there's no shortcuts to God. Pray, fast, ask him to reveal, Lord, what is my domain? What is my authorization? And how do I walk it out? And check, am I truly submitted under legitimate authority? And how can I operate under them in such a way that I'm protected, covered, and finished my course? Love you guys as always. Have a great one. Please do continue to subscribe and invite other people to this journey. Next week, I'm going to talk about the spiritual authority that we have.